I'm here with 10 more tips on how to skip an epidural and have an unmedicated birth. Now, once again, I'm starting with one of my absolute favorites, and that is to learn how the transition phase really messes with your mind. Now, this phase of labor it's kind of wild, and I want to dive into the specifics, but I want to mention that this is the second of 10 tips for achieving an unmedicated birth. If you missed part one of this list, I'm going to put a link up here, and at the end of the video and in the description, you'll find a link there too. Now, as we go through this list, remember that these are my best tips, and you might not be able to follow all of them. Everyone has different health situations and different circumstances, but if you can check off as many as possible, you're going to set yourself up for success. Okay, so back to that first tip about transition. Transition is the last stage of labor. It's when your cervix is dilating from 8 centimeters dilated to 10 centimeters dilated. This is where your contraction pattern is super intense. They are coming very quick and they are lasting a long time. You're looking at a labor pattern of like coming every 3 minutes and lasting 2 minutes. So you'll have a 2-minute contraction and a 1-minute rest, and then again a 2-minute contraction, 1-minute rest. This is a super intense phase of labor. It's also the shortest phase of labor usually. Now, during this intense pattern, many people experience this psychological and emotional challenge as well. It's so common for people to want to give up during this phase. I don't know how many times I've had clients in transition look at me and tell me that they're ready to go, that they're done, they don't want to do this anymore, and that they want an epidural. Now, one time, I actually had a client open her hospital room door and start walking down the hall towards the exit of labor and delivery. I had my back turned because I was getting something out of my hospital bag, and when I turned around, she had walked out the door. Her contractions were so long and strong together, I knew that she was going to have a baby soon. It was the third time I had supported her in labor. Anyway, she's walking down the hospital. Her husband and I run after her and say, "Hey, what's going on?" And she said she's done. She wants to go home and she didn't want to be there anymore. So she was in transition and her mind was just not really being rational. The rational mind just doesn't seem to work in this phase of labor. I remember her husband and I had to turn her around and assure her she was going to have a baby soon. And of course she did in like 15 minutes. What we need to know here is that this is really real. It's almost like a signpost. When you see this transition phase happen, when you see the contractions in this pattern and you see this emotional sign point come up, probably in transition. So the important thing here is to be aware of this phase, and then you also want to make sure that everyone supporting you is aware of this phase too. Everyone on your team should know that this is normal. And have a plan where they remind you of your why, which we talked about in part one of the video, during this phase. Encourage you. That's when they really have to dig deep with their encouragement because you are so close to that finish line. Moving on to number 2 tip, and that is to practice your breathing skills regularly. Breathing is such a powerful way to deal with contractions. And if you haven't practiced, it might not come easily to you. So practicing that slow, deep inhale and that slow, deep exhale can get your body aware, kind of like muscle memory, so that when labor starts, you can go into this really powerful breathing without really even thinking about it. Now, if I had my preference for you, I would say practice this breathing about 3 minutes every day in the 3rd trimester. By building up and practicing this breath, you are going to have it on lockdown when contractions come. And no matter what kind of labor you have, you are going to be able to utilize this powerful tool. So along with using breath in labor, make sure you learn and practice other coping strategies. So this is tip number 3. So a comprehensive childbirth class is going to be covering ways to cope with labor. So if you haven't taken one yet, I'm going to drop a link to the one that I teach online. You can check that out. Anytime you take a comprehensive class, you're going to be filling up your virtual toolbox with strategies. You're going to not just learn them, but you're going to want to practice them with your partner. This means spending time doing things like practicing changing positions, sitting on your birth ball. And if you can spend a few minutes once a week on that, that would be hugely helpful in making you more familiar so that when you're in labor, they're not going to seem so foreign. Speaking of changing positions and practicing them, tip number 4 is to change positions regularly in labor. So if you want to skip that epidural, you're going to want to keep moving. Labor loves movement. As we move in labor, it helps bring our baby down lower in our pelvis, which can lead to dilation, which can lead to frequency and duration of contractions, which means your labor will keep progressing to the end. Part 2 of this tip is to actually look for positions that bring on intense contractions. So when you're changing positions in labor, you might notice that certain positions kind of increase intensity of the contraction. So mentally think this is a good thing, and your partner might have to remind you of this, because even though at the time you might not want to experience this intensity, these positions are the ones that help speed up labor, which gets you to that goal. And when you're wanting to skip the epidural, you're going to want that labor to keep going longer and stronger. Long labors and exhaustion actually make achieving an unmedicated birth hard. Definitely look for those positions where you're having some nice, strong contractions and embrace those positions. Tip number 5, I call this one limp and loose in labor. Now, during a contraction, the muscles of the uterus, they're pulling open the cervix and they're pushing the baby down. This action can be more successful and less painful when you can allow your body to be limp and loose as possible. You want your muscles to be relaxed. You want to release any tension that you can in your body. And your partner can remind you of this. They can use phrases like limp and loose or ragdoll or loosey-goosey. Anything like that can just remind you to stay loose. Now, did I mention that many things that we do in labor seem really silly? So if you're thinking that some of these things that I've told you about sound kind of goofy, then you're totally right, okay? So hit the like button if you're getting any value from this list so far. Now, I forgot to mention that I put together a list that you can download for yourself. It's in the description below. You can find a link to that. Tip number 6 is to stay hydrated. Dehydration can actually slow down your labor. So you're going to be wanting to take sips between almost every other contraction. Now, you can vary what you're drinking, water, electrolytes, coconut water, that kind of thing. Just keep on drinking. Now, some hospitals put restrictions on drinking in labor. This is not based in research, and I strongly recommend questioning any of these types of policies. Okay, number 7 is similar to number 6, and that's to stay nourished in labor. Labor is hard work. You need fuel to get your body through it. Now, many people are not going to feel like eating an entire meal. So, you eat snacks on a regular basis throughout your labor, like a bite here and a bite there. And great snacks for labor include things like nuts, yogurt, squeezable applesauce pouches, squeezable peanut butter pouches, cheese, crackers, protein bars, things like that. Now, some hospitals also restrict food in labor, but again, if you are planning to skip an epidural, you're gonna wanna keep fueling yourself. Now, I have so many times witnessed clients where their energy gets low, their contractions start spacing out, becoming shorter, and then they eat a couple bites of a protein bar, and all of a sudden their mood changes and their contractions pick up again. This is a really important tip. My 8th tip is a big one, and that is avoid an elective induction. So for many people, this is a hard one because a lot of care providers are recommending induction at 39 weeks, and many of these recommendations are not really due to medical need. It can be so hard to question providers when they're recommending an induction, but if you want to give yourself the best chance to go unmedicated, then I really recommend avoiding an induction. Labor inductions are usually much longer than non-induced labor, and contraction patterns are often so much more challenging. Labor patterns with an induction usually have contractions coming closer together for a longer period of time. So best case, if you can avoid that induction, then that's what I want for you. My 9th tip is to be like Yoda. So are you familiar with the famous quote from Yoda where he tells Luke that there is no try, there's only do? I would love for you to adopt this pattern as well. So you aren't going to try to skip the epidural. You aren't going to try to go unmedicated. You are going to skip the epidural. Another way to think about this is think about if you're running a marathon. When people sign up to run a marathon, they don't usually say, I'm going to try to run the marathon. They just say that they are running the marathon. So I think people are hesitant to say that they are skipping the epidural just in case things happen where they decide that they need or want to get an epidural. But my thought here is that it's okay if you change your mind for any reason during labor, because you never know how it's going to go. But like in a marathon, if someone twists their ankle and drops out of the marathon, it's totally understandable. If you have a really long labor and you decide that you need to get the epidural, that is completely understandable and totally up to you. But if you go into labor with the mindset that you're going to do it, then I believe that you're going to be setting yourself up for success. Tip number 10 is to surround yourself with inspirational people. So skipping the epidural isn't how most people choose to give birth these days. For this reason, I think it's helpful to find other like-minded people to be inspired by. So do you have any family, friends, or coworkers who have had an unmedicated birth? If so, connect with them. Ask them to share their inspirational stories. Now, if you don't know anyone personally, you can always put together like a virtual network of people. Maybe it's like celebrities or YouTubers who have had unmedicated birth. Now, don't forget that I have put together all 20 tips into a resource that you can find below in the description. I'll also put a link to part 1 and the first tips. And if you are ready to practice that breathing in labor, but you're not really sure how to do it, I'm going to put a link to how to make that breathing happen. Now, no matter how you give birth, I wish you the best of luck, and I'll see you next time. Bye.